We're going to start talking about analog and digital audio, how analog works and how it's different, and compare and contrast to digital audio and how that works. Everybody works in the digital domain when you're working on your laptop or your telephone, even doing a memo on your phone is digital recording. But back in the day we had analog recording, and it's still very important to understand because everything builds from the analog. We went through in the first class a little bit of the history of analog recording with Alexander Graham Bell and all of those iterations of ideas as to how to record and capture the energy of recording, of audio, of acoustic energy, I should say, and store it and then play it back at another time. And we discussed briefly how recording is a way of capturing the sound energy or the acoustic energy of the air molecules moving and then playing those back and repeating that experience for somebody or yourself at a later time. So let's look at the basic energy flow of how recording process works. So first off, you start with a sound field of some sort. Me speaking or a musician playing creates a sound field or a sound energy in the acoustic domain, and then it gets converted through a transducer from acoustical to the electrical domain in some fashion, but that's typically your microphone of some sort. Then the electrical signal is manipulated so that we can conform the audio signal into something we want it to be, whether it's EQ, compression, all sorts of other kinds of processes that we can perform on it, and then converts the signal to a stored medium of some kind. Once it's stored, at a later time we can come back and take that stored medium and convert it back to the electrical domain, manipulate it again, and then we can go to an output transducer, which would be more like your speaker, and it changes it back to an acoustic domain energy, which, if everything goes right, what goes into this process with your purple blocks comes out sounding better. At least that's what we're trying to do, not sounding worse, or even just the same. So let's look at analog recording, an audio representation of the sound, and we use all these domains to actually perform what we're going to do with it. You can convert the audio signal into an electrical signal, digital signal, use the magnetic domain to store it, or an optical to store it. And actually, very interestingly, whether we're talking about analog or we're talking about digital, the storage medium is actually the same. So they're both magnetic. Whether it's a piece of tape or it's a hard drive, it's a magnetic storage device. So let's talk about the audio terms. Transducer, as we all know, converts one form of energy to another and converts the audio sound to another format that we can actually deal with in a different way. The signal, these are a few terms. The signal is the electrical energy of the audio. So the electrical energy is coded to follow what the audio acoustic energy was. Recording, storing and later playing back, and then mixing, combining and manipulating the sound elements into your final product. This is an interesting bit of information. Your microphone, in terms of its output, is about 0.002 volts or all the way up to 0.06 volts. And what I'm doing in this slide is showing you the different kinds of levels that you get out of different devices. So a microphone is much quieter than the professional line level at 1.23 volts. Professional line level is the level that everything operates in at the studio level once it's gone through a microphone mic preamp. And that's why a microphone needs a mic preamp to bring it up to line level, from microphone level. Consumer line level is considered minus 10 dB, and a lot of your consumer electronics has that kind of a level. Like out of your TV would be a consumer line level. It's quieter than the professional line level that you'd want in a studio. They actually make boxes to take it from consumer line level to pro line level if you're going to use a device in the studio. For example, a turntable, a consumer turntable, has to go through an amplifier to bring it up to line level as well. And then you look at the speaker, 4 volts, and capability of handling a lot of power. That gives you sort of a thumbnail understanding of the levels coming out of these devices and coming and going from these devices. Okay, gain staging is the process of optimizing the gain in each stage of your recording. So inside, let's take for example, inside an analog tape machine, you have a microphone level that's been brought up to a line level, and then it's recorded, and it goes through a process of somehow getting to be stored on a piece of magnetic tape. And in the process of all these electronics, there's stages of amplifiers to bring it up in level and to manipulate it. And optimizing each stage for gain and distortion and signal to noise level is really important, because you're going through so many stages of amplifiers. Even let's just take the simplest example of you're in your home project studio and you've got a microphone. You just bought a microphone and you decide that you want to record it. So you go into your interface, which connects directly into your computer. You don't realize it, but the interface is acting as the microphone mic pre, brings it up to line level, then it gets converted and it gets stored into your computer. So every stage that the signal passes has an amplifier section or some sort of electronic manipulation. You've got to be very careful to not compromise on signal to noise or compromise in the respect of distortion. If one stage distorts it too much, you overload it, then you're going to have bad recordings and you're going to have that distortion throughout the recording. So it's important to remember the gain structure that you're working with. Let me give you another example. Okay, so building off of the idea that we plug a microphone into a mic pre, and then we go into a mixer, let's say, into a channel of a mixer, and then from the mixer we go to a tape machine or a recording device of some sort. So if we take the level that's coming out of the mixer and bring it down and turn up the gain level on the mic pre, we're going to have a different situation than if we turn down the mic pre and turn up the mixer. So what's another good example of how you stage your gains so that they operate most effectively? Great example is for you guitar players, right? You have an amplifier that has a preamp level and a master gain level on the output. You've got an input gain and an output gain. And if you turn up the input gain and you turn down the output gain, you're going to get a distorted guitar sound, which is what you want sometimes with a guitar. Now, if you want a clean sound, you keep the input level down as low as it can be and bring the output level up. And in doing so, you're creating the optimum gain stages so that you minimize distortion and maximize the good side of signal to noise ratios. So in your recording, you generally don't want to create distortion. You want to have it a true sound. But there are times when you actually want to distort your equipment. Another example, not to get off topic, but the guitar sound in Revolution, which is a Beatles song. It's got this really, really ugly distortion to it. And from everything I've read, the way that they got that distortion wasn't through a guitar amp. What they did is they overloaded the preamp with signal so they could get that kind of really ugly distortion, and then all the other stages worked with that distortion. So they did the gain staging exactly in reverse of what we're normally trying to do. But gain staging is basically getting your signal flow and your gain structure proper so that you don't overload anything. Just as a general rule before we leave this page, to get the optimum gain staging, if you've got a microphone mic pre and an input to a recording device, you want to keep the mic pre as low as possible to get the right level into your recording device. And you want to keep your recording device input at sort of a nominal level of 1:1. So you want to keep the gain stages going from the front end of the signal path as low as possible, and the output gain stages as loud as you need them. So let's just, if I could grab a piece of chalk for a second. Drawing it's much more understandable. So let's say you've got a microphone here, right? And you're sending the signal into a mic pre, and then from there you're going into a compressor, let's just say, and then you're going into a recording device. Okay, so if you're traveling this path in terms of a block diagram, the input and the output stage both have inputs and output level controls. You want to keep the input down as low as you can, and the output at a more 1:1 level, meaning that what passes is about the same level. So basically, the output here is louder than the input. And so that means that what's coming into the next stage, if this one is turned down the same way, or in the same sort of manner, then this signal never gets to be able to overload the compressor. If the compressor input is turned up, then you're going to get a lot of signal going into the compressor and potentially overloading the compressor and creating distortion. And that actually creates a problem if you're trying to get a true sound. If you're trying to get distortion, that's what you do. So you want to keep the input as low as possible, the output at the level you need it to feed the next piece of gear, so that your meters all go to kind of zero. This has been a problem for a lot of people understanding this, even in the live music department, for example. I had a call from a friend of mine who's in a band. He's like, I can't seem to get the microphone not to distort. And what he was doing is, he had powered speakers, and he thought, well, I don't want to be too loud in the room, so I'm going to turn the speakers down. So he turned the speakers down, but he turned everything else up, and he basically did exactly what I'm telling you not to do. And so he was distorting the input to his powered speakers, and then everything was distorted. He couldn't understand because the speaker wasn't very loud. I'm like, well, you've turned down the gain of the speaker, but what's going into the speaker is really loud, and it's overloading the input stage. So if you go back and you reverse it, and you do this kind of process, you don't get distortion. That's really what I was trying to sort of get at with this slide, is that when you're going from one piece of gear to the next, it's really important to be aware of how much signal you're feeding the first piece of gear or the second piece of gear in the chain, so that you don't overload any one piece and not know where the distortion's coming from. You start from the beginning and keep the inputs down and the outputs up, and then you raise the inputs until you get enough level. Turn down the mic preamp first. Turn everybody up at the end stages. So then you're feeding less signal through the chain to keep the volume low, rather than feeding a lot of signal through the chain and turning down the last piece of gear to keep it down. See what I'm saying? That creates a situation where you can overload the pieces of gear in the chain, and that's when you get the distortion. So it's really important to sort of pay attention to what you're doing. And this is very typical, especially even with your home studios, with your interfaces. And you've got an input level, you've got an output level, you've got an input level, you've got a Pro Tools level, you got a, for example, even on a mixing board, right? You've got all of the individual channel levels, and then you've got a master fader. You never like pull the master fader down and turn the other faders up. That's the situation where you get distortion. First thing you do when you go to a board is you turn the master fader up to 0. So it's even levels, it's up to maximum, and then you bring up the individual sounds until you get a good blend and a nice level out of it. And the same thing occurs with a mic preamp or any piece of gear that's chained into the next, where there's a staging of amplifiers or sound manipulating devices. Okay, so recording terms, just to be clear, right? A track is a particular audio signal. Your building block when you're recording is a track. With tape, it's a physical stripe on a piece of tape. For a digital recording, it's basically a collection of binary files. But it's one individual sound that's your building block that you're going to create a bunch of building blocks and create a mix by blending these tracks together. A channel is used to describe the path of a mixer rather than a tape machine. A track is always used in reference to a recording device, and a channel is used in terms of a mixer that can blend these tracks together.